Within foragers, here are 6 traits, and this is where people have collected field work or data on hunter-gatherer tribes around the world in different places and times, and then they've tried to come up with universal themes or things that they see in these people groups. So firstly, there's seasonal mobility. In other words, you have to move with the weather. So in the summer, you may be able to hunt and forage up in the high mountains, but as fall and winter comes, you're going to want to move down into the valleys. Same thing, if you're in an area for very long, the game is either going to be hunted out or it's going to run away from you, and you're going to have eaten all the fruit and berries. And so after a period of days or weeks, your band or group is going to have to move to the next valley over or some place where you haven't used all the resources. Secondly, we find division of labor. And like we mentioned earlier, that can be based on gender, age, or skill set. Hunter-gatherer groups tend to go through cycles of congregation, because think about it, if you're trying to just live off the land, you're not going to want to have more than one or a couple families living together as a group. It just creates too much pressure on the water supply, the fuel supply, the food supply. So you generally are living most of the year in very small family groups, or maybe multi-generational family groups, and that will be your like band. But you're also part of a larger ethnic group, a larger tribal group, where you will have certain set times and places where you will congregate and meet. And this is often where people will catch up on the news, barter and exchange goods, also finding spouses and mates from other families, other bands when you come together and meet. But they can only stay together for a short period of time, and then they have to disperse again. One of the most famous gatherings of tribal hunter-gatherer groups was at the Little Bighorn in American history. And this is where we had, I believe, 2 bands of the Cheyenne, and the different groups of the Sioux all came together, and there were literally thousands of Indians in this encampment together. Now, normally they would have been in much smaller bands, in the 10s to the 100s at the most, but in this particular time and place, you had a congregation of all the tribes of the Sioux and their cousin tribes, the Cheyenne. And that is the gathering that Custer wrote into. He thought he was writing into one of these little groups, like he had been quite successful subduing in the past, but this time he was seeing the entire Sioux Nation. The next is bands. I already talked about that. That's like the small family group. 5 is reciprocal sharing. In these cultures, because you're nomadic, there's no point to hoard things. You simply have the tools, the clothing, and the shelter you need to survive. You don't want to carry extra because you know you're going to have to pack up and move it within a couple weeks. And basically all your neighbors have the same sorts of things you have. So it's a very egalitarian society. If you had a good berry picking day, you may want to share some of those berries with some of the other people in the tribe, because you're not going to be able to eat them all. You don't want them to go bad. You don't want to collect rodents. But see, this isn't like in a village or a settled society where you have storehouses or granaries or things where you can save stuff for the winter. Everything is pretty much eaten as is. So you're going through periods of feasting and then famine. And so the idea here is, when you have been blessed with a lot of berries or fish or meat or whatever it happens to be, you want to share that with other members of the band. And then hopefully, if you have a hard time or you get injured or you have a poor day hunting, someone else who was successful will share with you. And this is also like a social welfare program of where widows or the old or sick or people who do not have a provider are shared with by those who are able to hunt and forage in the band. Okay. And then finally, even in these nomadic tribal societies that don't live in a set place, there is still a sense of, I don't want to use the word ownership, but rights and privileges to certain resources. That might be a valley, it might be the fish in a river, it might be the acorns or the pine nuts that grow on certain trees. And they have established like hereditary or ancestral rights to certain hunting or harvesting grounds. And when those are violated, it can cause conflict between different bands or different tribal groups. All right. We saw that quick video on the Kung, and let me just tell you a little bit more about them. The Kung average 17 hours per week foraging. For women, it typically works out to about 13 hours a week, and for men, 22 hours a week. How many hours a week do you think the typical American works? We talk about like a 40-hour work week, but that's just your formal job. That's not counting all the work you do at home, all the side projects you have going. Most Americans are working 60 plus, if not 80 hours a week. Imagine if you only had to work 20 hours a week to provide for the needs of your family. How much free time that would give you to simply be with the people you love, to enjoy your hobbies, or just reposing, just hanging out and enjoying life. And so even though it may look hard, I mean, the hardest thing about this is there's no guarantees, right? Every day you have to catch the food for that day or harvest the food for that day. Now, some groups have been able to preserve food through like drying it, through like making jerky. In the Americas, the Indians were famous for making pemmican, where they would take dried meat and dried berries and nuts, and they would mush it, grind it all together, and they would make, it was like great travel food. In fact, I still use that when I hike today because it's lightweight, because it's dried, but it's full of protein and nutrition, vitamins, minerals from the fruits and vegetables. And so that would help them get through the hard or the lean times